In a new campaign ad, your opponent, Haraz Gambari, claims you won't be able to stand up to rioters and looters. What's your response, and will you stand up to people that may want to wreak havoc on District 3?
Yes, so I'm definitely all for law and order as far as not, burning down buildings and looting and committing more crimes. I'm never, in support of adding violence to violence. But as far as peaceful protests, I think that a lot of those peaceful protests have turned violent not because of the protesters themselves. I'm sure you might have seen on the news there a number of cities where they held peaceful protests. People had their children there, and there were even children being hit by rubber bullets and tear gas and stuff like that. So I don't condone violence in any sort of way, but I do believe that people, have their First Amendment right to gather and make their voices heard and protest in support of justice for everybody.
Activists want change when it comes to the way Black people are being treated by police, which has been proven worse than the way law enforcement treats white people. What's your plan to establish systemic change?
My plan, first and foremost, is to listen to what the problems are in communities where this type of distrust and this type of treatment by law enforcement takes place. That's why these protests have really been happening all over the country. It's because people know that there's a problem. They're demanding that there is change, and it has to come from within. So, having accountability for our law enforcement, having a registry where if there are complaints or reports of abuse of power and cases like that, that people can see those things. It's open to the public, and people can demand justice or removal of those law enforcement officers from their communities if they don't feel safe and that they're trustworthy.
The coronavirus pandemic has hurt a lot of small businesses in District 3. What is your plan to fast track the economic recovery?
We really have to take care of our communities, the people that work in these businesses. Businesses alone can't hold up entire communities with the economic impact that's happened from COVID-19. We have more people on unemployment or applying for unemployment than we've seen in recent decades. So it has to come from, the state has to step in, whether they're borrowing money from federal dollars or generating some sort of new revenue. That way they can direct that money into communities that need it most for, the social services and everything that people are going to need to pull themselves out of it, and businesses alike. It's hurting big businesses, small businesses. I think everyone's been hurting a lot financially from COVID-19.
And COVID didn't just put a strain on the businesses, but the people that get it. If elected, what will you do to implement affordable and adequate health care for Wood County residents who are struggling right now?
I believe that Ohio could and should adopt a universal health care system for everyone. I don't believe that healthcare should be a privilege for those who can afford it. I believe that everyone, no matter your ability to work or pay or what have you, deserves healthcare and shouldn't have to go without the necessary healthcare that they need just for a matter of the cost. So the state should, be providing an option. Other states are capable of doing it. Other countries are capable of doing it. I think that, not only are people struggling because of COVID and not being able to work, but anyone who's been sick and they've had to go to the hospital just to see if they have it, to get the tests, the recovery for it, any other complications, it's putting a strain on everybody right now, with being out of work and the cost of healthcare. So the state needs to, do more to ensure that everyone has access to healthcare, because, your health is your first line of being able to do everything else in life. So making sure everyone is healthy and has access to the healthcare they need is more important than, the profits from the healthcare industry. So
another issue that is impacting a lot of people right now is the opioid epidemic. And it doesn't just hurt Lucas County, but its southern neighbor, Wood County. How will you create solid change in the fight against opioid addiction?
It is a really, really big problem all throughout the state, especially, here in Northwest Ohio, we see it all the time. I think that investing more money into programs for mental health and addiction services locally for those who need it, and without it having to, cost an arm and a leg, and without having to police addiction, which is more so a mental health issue than a criminal issue. So we need to treat, people that have addiction as though they need help for that, and not just locked away from society. And then, when they come back into society after being incarcerated, having all these extra obstacles that they were already struggling with, with the addiction in the first place. It's just making people's lives harder. And I think if we're taking our money and we're just throwing it into the criminal justice system, and as far as expanding prisons and paying for more riot gear and stuff like that, we need to put that into our communities in a way where people who need it can use it. And that the opioid crisis is 100% one of those places where we need to invest more money in helping people instead of criminalizing the behavior, because that's not helping solve the issue.
Infrastructure in the district you're running to represent is aging, and repairs have been made to some areas, but others are still being left out. What's your plan to improve Wood County's aging roads and bridges?
I think the state all around has a lot of infrastructure issues, not just, crumbling roads, but old water treatment plants. We're still using, older methods of energy production. All of these things need a huge, huge upgrade. And I think that the state, not using funds to, billions of dollars to bail out different industries just because they already exist, and making sure that we use that money in a responsible way to invest in the infrastructure that we absolutely need if we're going to stay, a productive and prosperous part of the state and state all around. We're going to have to invest in those systems. That way, future generations don't have to come up with the funds when it becomes a bigger crisis than it has been.
There are a lot of companies that are willing to make these repairs, and there are a lot of local companies that are willing to make these repairs. How will you invest in the jobs market that is making those repairs?
We need to invest in education for training, just all around vocational training. There's this huge disconnect between, the jobs that they say are open, or they're opening and they can't get people to fill those jobs. And then, on the other hand, we have a lot of people that are without jobs. The disconnect there is having the training for that. So we need to invest in whatever programs necessary to get the people that need the training to do these jobs, the training that they need to do the jobs. So these jobs are being done and people have those jobs. Right now, there's that huge disconnect there. And I think that's a really big issue that we have to address and fund creatively, by getting partnerships in local communities and figuring out how to get these people into these programs to get trained for these positions.
Former Ohio House Speaker Larry Householder was arrested for his role in a $60 million bribery scheme. What is your take on corruption in Columbus, and what do you think needs to change in order to root it out?
I think corruption in Columbus, unfortunately, has in some ways become the status quo. I feel like people feel that way about politics in general, at the federal level and in other states too. But Ohio is so central to politics that it seems that a lot of what Ohio does, as far as adopting policies, the country kind of falls behind that, and follows that lead. So if we're going to be, leading the way in politics, it shouldn't be from, a basis of corruption. Unfortunately, gerrymandering has been a huge issue in the state of Ohio. every 10 years, whoever is in power essentially gets to decide where these districts are drawn. They're not always drawn fairly. It comes down to legislators choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their legislators. And, over time, that happening, that's how we wound up with a Republican supermajority, which, is already non-reflective of how voters are choosing when they go in the ballot box, and they choose who they want, but depending on where you happen to live is, you're subjected to being just thrown into whatever district you were drawn into. And it's favored a party that's been able to, have each other's backs and getting away with who knows what else. I mean, just this bribery scandal that is still, under investigation. That aside, there's just been a big push for pretty harmful policies to go through at the Statehouse. Attacks on reproductive rights, just not passing for the last 10 or so years. An Equality Act that gives LGBTQ people of Ohio the same protections and discrimination that everybody deserves in the state. So there's been a huge wall that's been put up in the Statehouse that it's been really hard to get legislation through that isn't just part of an agenda that's meant to hurt one side and favor the other. I think it's kind of gotten into that way of governing in the last decade or so, but even before then, education's been slowly defunded for the last 20 years. So I think there's just been a shift in priorities at the Statehouse. It's become about, who is in power, how they're going to use that power, and not using that power the way that it's meant to be, where people are choosing their representatives and they are reflecting the will of the people. I think that's gotten lost in the Statehouse, and this bribery scandal kind of showcases how bad that can really be for people and what it does to the state.
You kind of already answered this question, but if you're elected to the Ohio State House, who and what will you advocate for?
I will represent and stand for and advocate for everybody. Children, people of color, immigrants, LGBTQ, women, the elderly, disabled people, everybody should have a voice and everybody should have a seat at the table. And a representative, you're there to listen to the people, hear their concerns, and find solutions for, all of those issues that come up in every community in your district, and not just the people in your district, but you're accountable to everybody in the state. So, I would advocate for everybody in the state, and I truly do want, prosperity for every single person, regardless of how you vote or regardless of, your political ideas or anything like that. I think that, every part of the Constitution, all the freedoms that we have, I stand for all of those, and I want to represent and advocate for everybody in that way.
Speaking of the way in which people vote, there have been a lot of concerns about mail-in ballots and the postal service. What is your message to voters who maybe plan on using the mail service or aren't using it because they're not confident that their vote is going to count?
I definitely understand those concerns. I had concerns myself in casting my ballot. I wasn't sure how backed up, the postal service would be. There's obviously been a very deliberate attack on the postal service, specifically for voter suppression. So I feel that, if you don't have faith in your ballot's ability to make it to, your local board of elections in time, which I believe they stop accepting them as long as they're postmarked by November 2nd, they will stop being able to accept and count them at the board of elections on November 13th. So if you're not confident that your mail system is going to be able to get your ballot there, there are, other options. There is still in-person voting on election day. There's early voting at early voting locations, which you can find on the Secretary of State's website. In Wood County, it's at the Wood County Courthouse, which is in downtown Bowling Green. I know a huge issue for larger populated areas. My district is only, Wood County. We're a rather small, not densely populated district. Our one courthouse has our drop box outside, and there's just one of them, and that seems to so far, not be a really large issue. But for more densely populated cities, you have millions of people trying to early vote. Those lines are going around blocks. People are all trying to find a place to park just to drop off their mail-in ballot in the drop box outside, because so far there's just one per county. So it's been a really, really huge issue, but it is possible. There's going to be some delays in getting all of the ballots counted and getting accurate results and counting all the ballots after the election. So we might not know the results of the election until the end of November, maybe even December, and who knows what kind of court challenges there will be in contesting those results. So just make a plan to vote. Vote early if you can. Have somebody help you get to the ballot box, the drop box outside, or get to wherever your early voting location is. The hours are pretty long throughout the day, so you have opportunities in the morning, as well as into the evening. The best thing about a drop box is you can even walk up there late at night when there's not going to be lines or huge crowds or anything like that. So just make a plan to vote based on your confidence in your postal system, getting it to the Board of Elections on time. If you're not confident, make a different plan, but just make a plan to vote.
Is there anything else you want voters in District 3 to know about you and the campaign you're running?
I guess I would just say I'm a first-time candidate. I've been raised in Wood County my entire life. I love this place. I call it home. I never really saw myself running for office, to be honest. I always kind of wanted to. I just never saw it in my future. I've gone through a lot of things in my adult life, and just being a first-generation college student, I just thought that it wasn't in the stars. But the last 4 years and then some have been challenging for a lot of people, and a lot of people that I know. So that inspired me to run, because I know the challenges that people face in this county. And I want to be, there to listen and to work through those challenges and bring Ohio to where it needs to be. Not only for, me, myself, my family, my neighbors, everybody, but for future generations going forward. There's a lot of work to do. And that's why I decided to run our campaign. There's not a lot of people working on the campaign. There's a lot of local support for the campaign. It's been a really great collaborative effort in the community to, get my message out there. I work full time. I've been working through this pandemic. It's been a really great challenge, but a wonderful experience. And any support would be, wonderful. Look me up on Facebook. My website is laurelforohio.com. Just make sure that you're not only, voting, not just for me, but know who you're voting for. Do your research before you go to the ballot box, or find someone who has and ask them. It's just very important to vote. Make sure you have a plan to vote.
Ohio District 3 Representative candidate Laurel Johnson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jaden.